In just a few minutes, several armored vehicles can be reduced to burning wrecks, and scenes like this have been recorded again and again across the front. Open-source trackers have documented thousands of Russian armored losses since the war began, and a large share of those vehicles were hit not by aircraft or long-range missiles, but by artillery guided by drones and by small FPV attack drones that cost a fraction of the targets they destroy. That is the scale of the damage. The real shock is how fast it happens. A mechanized column moves forward with a tank in the lead and APCs carrying infantry behind. Some vehicles carry anti-drone cages, some use jamming systems, and crews believe they are prepared for a battlefield where unmanned aircraft are everywhere. Yet preparation does not guarantee survival. Long before the column reaches the defensive line, Ukrainian reconnaissance drones are already watching from above. As the convoy stretches along a narrow route mixed with open ground, every movement becomes a clear coordinate on a screen. One vehicle hits a mine or is forced to stop at the wrong angle. The entire axis of movement begins to break. Artillery does not need to destroy everything at once. It only needs to slow the column and force soldiers out of their armor. At that exact moment, FPV drones enter the fight, and what looked like a routine push turns into a race between reaction and destruction. The battle begins with a classic mechanized push, but every movement is already being watched from above. A Russian assault group forms with a tank at the front, armored personnel carriers following close behind, and several support vehicles carrying ammunition and supplies further back. The formation is designed for speed and pressure. The lead tank is expected to absorb initial fire and clear obstacles, while APCs bring infantry close enough to dismount and secure ground. Behind them, logistics vehicles ensure that the push does not stall after the first contact. The objective is clear and direct. The column aims to approach the Ukrainian defensive line, unload troops near key positions, with the intent to either continue advancing if resistance is weak or pull back along the same route if losses become too heavy. Timing is critical in this type of operation. If the vehicles keep momentum, they can force defenders into reaction mode. If they slow down too early, the entire plan becomes fragile. From the Ukrainian side, the engagement does not begin with gunfire. It begins with observation. Reconnaissance drones rise high above the battlefield long before the armored group reaches the line of contact. Their task is not to strike first. Their task is to read the shape of the formation, measure the spacing between vehicles, and identify which unit carries the most tactical weight. A tank at the front means one kind of plan. A heavy APC cluster in the middle suggests another. As the convoy moves forward, the drone operators track its route in real time. They watch for changes in speed, slight turns in the road, and moments when the spacing between vehicles tightens. These details matter because a stretched formation is harder to protect evenly. If the first vehicle moves too far ahead, it becomes isolated. If the rear vehicles lag behind, they risk being cut off. The Russian crews believe they are advancing toward a defensive line. In reality, their progress is being translated into digital coordinates. Each armored hull becomes a moving point on a screen. The operators above do not need to guess the direction of travel. They see it clearly. The path chosen by the column begins to look less like a route of attack and more like a corridor being measured. Inside the vehicles, soldiers focus on terrain and immediate threats. They scan tree lines and check for signs of mines. They rely on armor and onboard protection systems. What they cannot see is how their formation appears from altitude. From that angle, the order of vehicles, the gaps between them, and the rhythm of movement create a pattern. That pattern can be studied before any shell is fired. At this stage, no explosions have occurred. Engines are still running, radios are still calm, and the column maintains its planned direction. Yet the balance of the engagement is already shifting. One side is moving in steel and fuel. The other side is building a picture. The critical question now forms quietly in the background. When the moment to strike arrives, which vehicle should be targeted first to break the structure of the push? Should the lead tank be disabled to block the route? Or should an APC carrying infantry be hit to disrupt the human element of the assault? That choice will determine whether the column keeps its shape or begins to unravel. The approach phase looks controlled on the surface, yet the column is already entering a corridor of risk that cannot be seen from inside the vehicles. The formation spreads out as it advances, and the spacing appears disciplined at first glance. Crews try to avoid bunching up because tight clusters invite concentrated fire. By stretching the line, they hope to reduce the chance that a single strike can damage multiple vehicles at once. On paper, this is a rational adjustment to a battlefield filled with drones and artillery. In motion, however, the longer the column becomes, the harder it is to protect every segment with the same level of cover. The lead tank keeps a steady pace. APCs follow at measured intervals, and support trucks maintain distance behind. The result is a thin chain of steel moving across mixed terrain. Each gap between vehicles becomes both a safety buffer and a potential weakness. If the first element encounters trouble, those behind must decide quickly whether to close the gap or hold position. That hesitation can create a fracture in the overall rhythm. Some armored vehicles are fitted with metal cages designed to disrupt incoming FPV drones. Others appear equipped with electronic warfare systems meant to interfere with remote control signals. These additions change the silhouette of each hull and give crews a sense of layered protection. Yet the level of defense is not identical across the convoy. One unit may carry upgraded shielding, while another relies on older equipment. This uneven distribution means that the line is only as strong as its least prepared section. As the vehicles move through open ground, visibility from above increases sharply. Fields and shallow rises offer little concealment once the column leaves tree lines or built-up areas. From an aerial perspective, the contrast between armored shapes and the surrounding landscape becomes clear. Thermal cameras can detect engine heat, especially when speed drops. Optical lenses can track movement patterns across exposed routes. The risk intensifies when the formation slows. Even a slight reduction in pace, whether due to terrain or caution, extends the time each vehicle remains within a defined observation zone. A moving target is difficult to lock. A slowing one becomes easier to follow. If one driver adjusts course or brakes unexpectedly, the vehicles behind must react, and that reaction can compress the line for a few critical seconds. Inside the convoy, attention is focused forward. Commanders monitor radio traffic and watch for signs of mines or anti-tank teams. They assume that dispersion lowers vulnerability. What is less visible to them is how dispersion also stretches their protective umbrella. Close-range air defense assets cannot be everywhere at once. Electronic jamming cannot fully blanket a column that extends across several hundred meters. At this stage, nothing has exploded. The engines continue to push forward, and the plan appears intact. Yet the geometry of the movement is changing the balance. The longer the column grows, the more decision points it creates. A problem at the head may not be felt immediately at the rear, and a strike in the middle can split the group into isolated segments. The question now becomes direct and practical. When a convoy stretches across open ground and protective measures vary from vehicle to vehicle, where is the true breaking point? Is it at the front where the path is chosen, or in the center where disruption can divide the force into two vulnerable halves? The turning point comes in a single moment, when one vehicle stops in the wrong place and the entire axis of advance begins to collapse. As the column moves through the risk corridor, the lead elements approach a section of ground that appears clear. There is no visible barrier and no immediate explosion in the air. Then a sharp blast rises from beneath one of the armored hulls. A mine detonates under a vehicle, or a hidden obstacle forces it to halt abruptly. The effect is immediate. The vehicle does not continue forward, and its position blocks the narrow route. That single pause creates a bottleneck. The tank or APC behind it must brake, adjust, or attempt to maneuver around. On a confined path, there is little room to do so. Vehicles that were spaced out moments ago now compress under pressure. The clean geometry of the formation disappears. Above the battlefield, the reconnaissance drone shifts focus. Instead of tracking the entire convoy, the operator locks onto the point where movement has stopped. The stalled vehicle becomes the anchor for the next phase. Coordinates are transmitted quickly to artillery units positioned farther back. What was once a moving line is now a fixed reference point. The first artillery rounds do not need to destroy every target. They land close enough to force drivers to react. Shrapnel hits armor, dust rises, and shockwaves travel across the ground. A direct hit is not required to create disorder. Even near impacts can damage wheels, tracks, or external equipment. More importantly, they force crews to make decisions under stress. As shells continue to fall, some vehicles attempt to reverse while others try to push forward around the obstacle. In that confusion, spacing breaks down further. A column designed for forward motion becomes trapped in its own length. Radio calls overlap. Orders change quickly. The planned direction of attack turns into a struggle to regain control of the route. Inside the APCs, infantrymen feel the shift before they fully understand it. When armored carriers stop moving and incoming fire intensifies, remaining inside becomes a risk. At a certain point, commanders order dismount. Hatches open. Soldiers jump out and scatter toward ditches, shallow trenches, or any depression in the ground that offers limited cover. This is the most exposed moment. When troops leave their vehicles, the protective shell of steel is gone. They must rely on terrain and speed to survive. From above, drone signatures caught scene as engines idle and human figures move across open areas. What was once a column of machines now becomes a mixed cluster of stationary armor and dismounted personnel. Artillery continues to shape the space. Rounds land in patterns that restrict movement rather than simply destroy. A damaged vehicle blocks the front. Incoming fire threatens the rear. The convoy is no longer advancing, it is being held in place. At this stage, the assault has lost its rhythm. The original objective fades behind the urgent need to survive the immediate pressure. The battlefield is divided into small pockets where crews act locally instead of as one coordinated force. The question for viewers becomes clear. Which moment carries greater danger? Is it when armored vehicles are still rolling forward with engines at full power? Or is it when soldiers are forced to abandon those vehicles and search for cover in open ground under fire? The next phase begins when FPV drones enter the fight and turn disruption into destruction. After artillery has slowed the column and forced vehicles into awkward positions, small attack drones move in at low altitude. Their targets are no longer fast-moving armored hulls advancing in formation. They are damaged machines, stalled carriers, and crews trying to recover control. A vehicle that has lost speed becomes easier to approach. A truck that is reversing under pressure cannot react quickly to a sudden dive from above. The first FPV locks onto a disabled armored carrier near the bottleneck. It approaches from a shallow angle, avoiding direct lines where defensive fire might track it. The impact is precise. The charge strikes the upper surface, and smoke rises from the hatch area. Even if the vehicle was not fully destroyed by artillery, this second hit ensures it will not rejoin the fight. Another drone shifts attention to a machine attempting to retreat along the same route. The operator tracks it visually, adjusting course as the target weaves around debris. The goal is not random damage. The goal is to remove mobility. A hit to the rear or side can cripple movement and block the path for others. Once a vehicle stops, the corridor narrows further. What stands out in this phase is how operators manage time. An FPV has limited flight duration, and every second in the air matters. If one armored hull is already burning and offers no additional tactical value, the drone does not waste itself on a wreck. It searches for another active target within range. This constant reassessment keeps pressure high. The pattern of strikes often follows the logic of division. Hitting the front element prevents forward progress. Striking the center splits the formation into two isolated groups. When the middle is cut, The rear cannot support the lead, and the front cannot fall back easily. The result is confusion across the entire axis. Drivers hesitate. Gunners scan the sky. Infantry attempt to reposition under stress. Publicly released footage from Ukrainian drone units, including teams associated with Magyar, has shown sequences where multiple vehicles are destroyed in rapid order. The rhythm is deliberate. One impact creates fire and smoke. A second strike targets a different hull within the same cluster. A third drone follows up to ensure that damaged equipment is rendered unusable. The tempo is continuous rather than scattered. On the ground, the psychological effect builds quickly. Soldiers who have just dismounted now face threats from above. Crews inside surviving vehicles must choose between staying sealed inside or opening hatches to improve visibility. Neither option feels secure. A closed hatch limits awareness. An open one increases exposure. As FPVs continue their runs, the battlefield changes character. What began as a mechanized push becomes a series of small, intense engagements around individual vehicles. Each strike narrows the options available to the remaining crews. Escape routes shrink. Communication grows chaotic. By this stage, the assault is no longer defined by its original objective. It is defined by survival and extraction. The critical question now moves to the wider picture. When a convoy has been cut at key points and small drones keep circling above, should additional forces be sent forward to stabilize the situation? Or would that only add more targets to an already controlled corridor? The climax unfolds when protective cages fail under repeated strikes and support vehicles turn into explosive triggers. Several tanks in the stalled formation are fitted with metal grills designed to defeat incoming FPV drones. At first glance, these cages appear solid and well-positioned above the turret and engine deck. When the first drone dives, it hits the outer layer and detonates. The blast bends metal bars and throws fragments outward, but the core of the vehicle remains intact. Smoke rises, and the crew may believe the protection has worked. Seconds later, another drone approaches. This time, the structure is already damaged. Gaps have opened where steel was once aligned. The second impact does not need to land perfectly. It only needs to reach the weakened point created by the earlier explosion. The charge slips through the distorted frame and penetrates deeper. Flames burst from the top of the turret. The earlier sense of safety disappears. This pattern changes how the battlefield feels. A single layer of protection is no longer enough when strikes come in waves. A vehicle that survives the first hit becomes a marked target for the next one. Operators above do not need to guess which hull has been softened. They can see deformation and smoke. They adjust accordingly. The danger grows when support trucks are caught in the same zone. Ammunition carriers and fuel vehicles often sit slightly behind the armored line, waiting for a signal to move forward. In a fluid assault, they provide the energy that keeps the push alive. In a stalled corridor, they become liabilities. One FPV locks onto a logistics truck loaded with shells. The impact ignites stored rounds. The explosion that follows is far larger than the drone's own charge. Secondary blasts ripple through the air. Burning debris scatters across nearby vehicles. Fire spreads quickly along exposed surfaces. Concrete and soil are showered with fragments. The scene transforms into a hazard area where remaining crews cannot stand still. Engines rev as drivers try to escape the heat and falling debris. Infantry who had taken cover now face another wave of danger from expanding flames. The corridor that was already under artillery and drone pressure becomes a space where lingering even for a minute increases the risk of catastrophic loss. At this stage, the original mission has faded entirely. The question is no longer how to advance several hundred meters. The urgent calculation becomes how to extract what remains. A damaged tank blocks the front. A burning truck threatens the middle. Vehicles at the rear must choose whether to reverse under fire or attempt to maneuver around wreckage in limited space. Commanders must decide quickly. Sending additional units forward could help tow disabled armor or provide cover. It could also add fresh targets to a controlled kill zone. Pulling back might preserve surviving assets, yet retreat under pressure carries its own cost. The convoy is no longer an organized force. It is a fragmented collection of machines and men trying to escape a narrowing trap. The outcome raises a hard question for all leaders and analysts to consider. When a mechanized column has been locked in place, cage is broken. Should the remaining elements withdraw immediately to save what is left? Or should more forces be committed in an attempt to rescue stranded vehicles and restore momentum? It only takes one stalled vehicle to turn a confident advance into a burning corridor of steel. Looking back at the full sequence, the most striking detail is not a single explosion, but the chain reaction that pulled an entire mechanized column into a losing spiral. A mine or obstacle created the first choke point. Reconnaissance drones locked the image from above. Artillery froze movement and forced crews into survival mode. FPV drones then moved in to finish what had already been weakened. The most dangerous moment was when the convoy had to stop and commanders faced a brutal decision between pushing forward under fire or pulling back through chaos. Once infantry left the protection of armored hulls, the advantage of mechanized power began to fade. In the months ahead, the key issue will not only be how many vehicles are lost. The real question is whether Russia can adapt its convoy tactics, improve close-range air defense, and restore mobility under skies filled with drones. Will forces be forced to disperse into smaller groups, or will a new method emerge to break this pattern of layered disruption? The next battles may reveal whether this was a temporary setback or a lasting shift in how mechanized warfare survives in a drone-heavy environment. Share your view in the comments. Hit like, share this analysis, and subscribe to Military Force for more clear breakdowns of the ongoing fight between steel and unmanned systems.